Good evening and welcome to Edible Education. It's very good of you to all come out tonight in the midst of these challenging, dynamic, uncertain times. We really appreciate you being here in person. We also realize that this particular moment does present some challenges. I was walking around the garden this morning and I was completely just captivated by the sight of this hummingbird doing what it does best, pollinating the flowers, moving from flower to flower, not thinking about the coronavirus or the Super Tuesday or the drought or the climate or the heat, just doing what it does best. And then I started to think, this is more complicated than it looks. And you probably all have heard of this term, something going viral. Well, it's really going viral now. We have sort of two epidemics in tandem. We've got the coronavirus, and just my 2 cents, I just want to encourage all of you to take good care of yourselves. You know, wash your hands, try not to touch your face, do the hand or the foot bump instead of the hug or the kiss or the handshake. And just try to be really respectful to yourself and to everyone around you. It'll go a long way. And then if you're ever not feeling up to being in a class like this, just please stay home and take care of yourself, okay? And take care of the people around you. So, but we're in the midst of this epidemic where one thing spreads to another, one person to the next, very quickly. And it's not just the virus, but it's also the culture, the meme and the fear. And so the other thing that it's really incumbent upon us really as we are using this class to think about strengthening our change maker gene set to stay calm, stay grounded, stay alert. Next week we're going to have a class really all about lessons from the garden. And I'm going to actually share with you some of the things I've learned about staying grounded over the last number of years. I'm really happy tonight to tell you that I have the world's greatest fruit arranger, Alice Waters. Thank you, Alice. She couldn't help herself. She had to make sure they were, but really happy to have you with us tonight. You know, I saw this picture too, and it was making me think about how much we rely on our sight to interpret events and data. And you know, when you see a single bird in the sky, it's often difficult to kind of recognize its pattern of flight. But does anyone know what this is called? Do you know what this is, this picture? This is called a murmuration, yeah, a murmuration. This is when the starlings or the swallows fly in this amazing sort of formation, and they have this magnificent way of communicating with one another. And it just, you know, again, it reminds me of the power and mystery of nature, and also how when objects or beings become concentrated, something new comes into focus. So there's some lessons here for us. I wanted to thank all of you, too, for the feedback that you gave us at the midterm, and I want to thank Lila Adler, your class rep, for conveying that to us in a very helpful way. We're going to really try to take your constructive feedback and put it right to work even as soon as tonight. And so this week, I got 2 wonderful inquiries from students, and I want to address them tonight, just briefly. One of them was, what is a good reflection? You know, what does a 5 out of a 5 look like? In other words, how do I get a good grade on my reflection, right? Well, you know, last week we had these 9 wonderful students and recent alumni come and speak to you about their step into action from learning in the classroom into actual practice in the real world. And one thing, if you notice carefully, all of them had a certain sense of self-awareness, kind of an emotional intelligence. And when I asked each of them to come, I realized that they all shared this capacity, this skill set of reflection. And that is to be able to kind of step back and take stock of what's happening and also to learn quickly. So, we gave you an assignment that's due this Friday. You'll remember that. And I just thought I'd give you a couple of pointers on what does make a strong written reflection in this class. So first of all, it's got to be personal, it's got to be candid, and it's got to be authentic. It means you're speaking your true voice. You're being yourself, okay? You're not really trying to please somebody else. You're just trying to tell the truth without blame or judgment. You want to reference specific readings that you've done, the different lectures that you've been listening to, and you want to make these connections between things you've heard. What we're looking for in the reflection is, can you connect disparate pieces of information in a way that it makes a new kind of sense to you? What becomes clear to you as a result of making these connections? And in that way, your reflection offers a synthesis of your understanding. It takes something, again, that might be fragmented into a new whole. It also reflects some critical thinking. It shows you did the reading. It shows you listened to the lectures. It shows you really made some effort to put your thoughts down on paper. And you know what? These reflections are not for me, they're not for the teaching team, they're for you. And this is a practice that you can get into that's going to strengthen your ability to really be an effective change maker. Finally, a great 5 out of 5 will specifically answer the questions in the prompt. So if you miss that, you're not going to get a 5. Now, to make it even more tangible to you, Fiona has selected a reflection from last time and has asked the author if we might share it anonymously. So that's going to be posted on B courses. So if you want to take a look at one that the readers thought was particularly outstanding, that'll be for you. Now, another question that I got this week, which I really liked, was, Will, you've been talking about this bias for action. How do you develop a bias for action? It's a great question. I mean, if you're a scientist and you're a researcher and you're thinking, my job is to conduct experiments and discern the truth from those experiments, that's a form of objective inquiry. If you want to apply some research or discovery or science or insight in a way that you want to try to manifest change in the culture or the food system, you develop this bias for action. So I tried to think of 5 things that I might recommend you do to develop a bias for action. First, adopt a growth mindset. There's a professor at Stanford named Carol Dweck who's written extensively about a growth mindset. A growth mindset means I'm learning all the time. I'm growing all the time in my capacity to learn and integrate my learning. And one of the things that you do when you adopt a growth mindset is you quell the fearful inner critic that's always telling you what you can't do. So you kind of get this encouraging voice like, maybe I can do that. Let me try that. So the next thing you want to do for a growth mindset is you try something that's difficult for you. People I know who are really great change makers, one of the things they do, they look at their to-do list. They think about what's the most difficult, challenging, least fun thing that I have to do, and they do it first. Or what's the thing I've been avoiding that I could do? What's holding me back? I like to encourage people to adopt a sense of play so that you lower the perceived risks involved with trying something new. Just give it a try. Play. Maybe you'll make a mistake. Maybe you'll fail. Maybe it won't work. Maybe you'll learn something from that. That's part of the growth mindset. Another piece is to seek out a mentor, somebody who's been where you want to go and will take an interest in you and encourage you to take action. It's really important. The people that have been most meaningful to me in my own life have served in that role. Now, how do you engage a mentor? Your students, everybody that's accomplished anything in their life wants to help a sincere student. Trust me, use the student card. Don't write and say, "Can I pick your brain?" Have you ever done that? I get these emails, they say, "Hi, professor, can I pick your brain?" And I think, ooh, that just doesn't sound or feel and it's not reciprocal. You know, it's one way, it's transactional. So how do you engage a mentor in a relationship? What do you have to offer? And believe me, offering your eager curiosity and your interest and your commitment to be engaged in learning is a lot. And a mentor will respect that. So think about cultivating a relationship with a mentor. And then finally, locate what I like to call the urgent next. What's the next thing you could do? What's the next thing you can do? And instead of thinking about it for 3 days, like that next person you're going to call, or that next book you're going to read, or that next connection you're going to foster, you do it now. You do it now. You do it urgently. So that's how you develop a bias for action. I also wanted to remind you that you remember Effie Rollins was here last week from the Gill Tract Farm, and I just wanted to replay her invitation, which is coming up, I think, this Saturday for you to, is it Sunday? The 8th? I'm trying to remember. Sunday the 8th, to go to the farm, and there's an open house, and you can work on the farm and you can get your hands dirty. One of the suggestions that we got was, couldn't we organize a field trip? Well, here it is. You can go and do this. We've tried to organize field trips in this class, and it's a logistical nightmare. So just go. You can go on your own. It's a short trip from here, and you can get there. We're so fortunate tonight to have 3 really inspiring, experienced, influential people with us tonight. And I think, again, one of the suggestions we got from you students was, can we talk to some people who are like really doing stuff now? So it's going to be wonderful for you to hear from Anthony and Karen and what they're up to with Restore California. But before I introduce them, I want to introduce a dignitary that we have with us tonight. Secretary Karen Ross is in charge of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. She's kind of legendary in this space. She just got reappointed by Governor Newsom after serving, I think, for 8 years under Governor Brown. Before that, she worked with Secretary Tom Vilsack at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I think where you work closely with Kathleen Merrigan, probably, who was here a few weeks ago. And she's just known as a really successful steward of the magnificent resource that is California's agricultural lifeblood, and also a bridge builder across many different constituencies that oftentimes have sometimes competitive or unaligned agendas. So really grateful to have one of our really important representatives here from the great state of California. Please welcome Secretary Karen Ross.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. So it is indeed an honor to be here and to be invited to share a few thoughts with you and to share a stage with Anthony and with Karen and the good work that they're doing. But first, I have to say thank you, Alice Waters. I mean, I cannot imagine. I was in college for a couple of years, and I went off and worked, and then I went back to school nighttime for 7.5 years to get my degree. Who knows if there had been a class that was mandatory called Edible Education 101, what I might have been able to do with my life. So you all, I'm just looking forward to all that you've learned here and what you will do. I am going to be the boring bureaucrat tonight to talk about a little bit about the public policy arena, but I don't find it boring at all. I understand its direct impact on the bottom lines of our farmers and growers and how it can take how they farm into new and different directions. And I will have to say that agriculture in this state is a big deal. We grow over 400 different kinds of crops in the state because we've been blessed with the natural resources and up until now a climate that would allow us to grow things that cannot necessarily be grown in other places across the nation or around the world. And they are good, healthy, nutritious products. And they are stewarded by people on their own incentive because they're multi-generation farmers, but also because in California, to align with the values of our people, our almost 40 million consumers who are our neighbors and are our voters, we have some of the most stringent policies when it comes to labor, public health, and environmental policy. And that has helped shape us into the kind of innovative farmers that we are. I also have to note that it wasn't until more recently that I really thought about farmers and restaurants have so much in common. It's not just because this food that we grow and harvest and prepare and share. It's also when you look at the business models in agriculture and in restaurants. There are literally hundreds and thousands of them across our landscape. They are from the very, very smallest to the very largest, with very different business models of how they want to connect with their consumers. And that variety fits the choices of what our consumers are looking for. But at the end of the day, the more that we can, from the opposite ends of our food system, make direct connections, I think that we can work together in partnership and with collaboration and good communication to better serve those 40 million consumers who are just the ones that are in our state, who are also our voters and our neighbors. Because when you farm in California, as urban California has grown into our farmlands, we have a lot of people watching very closely what we're doing. And we also, and this is a very important thing for all of you who are studying business, to understand the power of being a consumer. That a lot of action happens because of consumers. That while I might talk to you tonight about public policy, regulations, statutes when they're passed, then become very hard to change, will never move at the rate of speed that our markets and technology today does, and especially the communication aspects of what we are dealing with. And that's bringing tremendous change that is very hard for a farming operation to adapt to because we're working in a biological system. We're working with soil, we're working with water when we have it, we're working with pest kinds of issues, and many other variables. And now the most important one that I want to talk about tonight, and my sense of urgency, is about climate change. Because our crops, these wonderful specialty crops that are so nutritious, that go almost directly from our field, from our orchard, to the homes of consumers, are also the most susceptible to even minor changes in temperature, especially our nighttime temperatures. And what that means for the crop being able to ripen to the most flavorful sense that it can be, as well as hitting different marketing times and seeing adjustments in those. Thinking about something as routine as fog, which many of our coastal communities have relied upon for decades and decades, almost nightly fogs that bring in that sense of moisture and some of the temperature relief that that brings, and then to have reports last year saying we've lost up to half of our fog nights. What does that mean for us and crops? To think about the new pests that are being introduced and that come earlier in the season and then come on top of other pests, and what that means for how we need to find more tools, more alternatives faster for our farmers. And very importantly, in a state like California, where we've built our entire infrastructure around precipitation that falls around the first quarter of the year in the northern part of the state, and then we've built this system to move it to the 25 million to almost 30 million Californians south of where those rainfall events and snowpack occurs for us to have water for all the competing needs. Water for drinking, safe, clean drinking water for drinking, water for commerce, water for our homes and our businesses, water to grow food, and water for our fish and all species. Water is an essential ingredient of life, and that is an essential ingredient to growing everything that we grow. So for me to have an opportunity to serve in the position that I served in, with the leadership of Governor Brown and now with Governor Newsom, has been a tremendous opportunity to really think through how do we engage farmers and ranchers into this discussion, to not only talk about what the threat is that's being presented, but to think about the opportunities. How do we have every farmer and rancher see themselves as a climate warrior? How do we take this thing that we take for granted, that we walk on, that some people call dirt, but is soil, that is the foundation of life itself, that in a handful of soil holds more biodiversity than anything we can imagine above the ground? How do we ensure that we are feeding our soil to make sure that our soil can continue to feed us? We have to stop borrowing our natural resources from future generations. So really and truly, it's about how do we increase that organic matter in our soil so that it can sequester carbon, so that it will have improved water holding capacity. If we improved the soil carbon, the organic matter in our soils by 1% on all 25 million acres of soil that we farm or tend livestock on, that would bring us, over a 3-year period of time, a 1.5 million additional acre feet of water holding capacity. That would lessen our dependence on groundwater pumping or surface water. This is the power of our soil and understanding how all of us have a shared responsibility and opportunity to work with our farmers and ranchers to invest in the kinds of practices that will help them steward that soil to be able to feed us, and that we all can put something back into it. That's what we've tried to do with our climate smart agriculture programs. The one I'm going to spend most of my time on tonight is our Healthy Soils program, which is an incentive grant program for our farmers and ranchers to use practices that will help increase that organic soil matter, to put that carbon into our soils, not letting it go into the atmosphere, to make sure that we're building up that soil so that we can continue to be productive, that we can offer good quality food, and make sure that those soils will be productive for decades and generations to come. That's where partnerships and collaboration like what Anthony and Karen are going to talk about tonight are really groundbreaking, pun intended, sorry, of really at the consumer end of a restaurant, asking consumers to make a very tangible investment for dollars that can come back to partner with our farmers and ranchers to make sure that we're spreading the adoption of those kinds of practices. We are using the Climate Change Investment Fund, which are funds generated from our cap and trade program, to reinvest in our economy, to move it not just to a low carbon economy in the state of California, but a carbon neutral economy. That requires transition, it requires capital, and it requires time. Our Healthy Soils program, we just put out our third call for proposals, puts out these innovation grants and incentive grants for farmers to adopt a suite of practices that we know work and that we can quantify what the greenhouse gas emission reductions are and measure what the carbon buildup is in those soils. We are doing that in conjunction with a program with the Strategic Growth Council to conserve farmland. If we only pave over it, we won't be able to feed ourselves, and we're losing the opportunities to sequester carbon. That's another program that we're funding through our Climate Change Investment Program. We're funding on-farm water use efficiency programs that are saving tens of thousands of acre feet of water on an annual basis. And because I have dairy, and we have a lot of dairy cows in the state, love them or not, we're turning that manure into renewable bioenergy and manure products that can be turned into soil amendment products so that we can displace synthetic fertilizer. This is part of Governor Newsom's efforts to really invest in a circular economy, to get waste out of our vocabulary and think about how everything we use or could use can be repurposed, reused, recycled, getting it out of our landfills, which also generate tremendous methane, short-lived climate pollutants, to make sure that we're being smarter about everything that we touch and where its end use is. This circular economy is driving our discussion right now on single-use food packaging. Tremendous change. When you all take your MBA to some great food company, you're going to be on the leading edge of how do we do these kinds of changes faster? What is the technology that will help us do that? Thinking about this circular economy as an eater, as a consumer, the choices that we're making. Are we looking for product that truly is more locally grown and sourced? Are we reinvesting in California farmers for their long-term viability and then also feeding our families better because we've shortened the transportation of that? What are we doing to make sure that our schools are sourcing more healthy, good food? Now, Alice wants it to all be free, and someday it will be, but that too takes time, Alice, okay? What I'm hoping you can take away is that policy is a grind. And it takes a lot of voices in that policy arena to come together to find consensus. Policy is about compromise. But I think that if we can work together in a collaborative way, in coalitions that have shared goals and shared values, we can drive change in policy and, more importantly, as consumers and as people in the food system, we can drive change even faster in the marketplace. And that's what I'm really anxious to hear Karen and Anthony share with you their ideas of how to make this happen. How we are, at the end of the day, each connected to one another. I think what Will was talking about, we have seen this coronavirus and how it's everyone in the world knows about it. Just like on food safety issues, because of our handheld technology, if it happens in any continent, we all know about it. We are connected. And we have to think in that way about the actions we take as individuals and the actions we take as society. This food system of ours is a big, complex system, and it sometimes gets very disconnected from the people who are closest to the consumers and the eaters, getting that information back to farmers so they feel they're part of it and that they're not shouldering it all alone. That's the beauty of the job that I get to do on a daily basis, and that's the discussion I look forward to having with you later. So I want to get down and hear from Anthony and Karen, the real stars of our program tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. We are delighted to be here. I think when I met Anthony, I was actually a graduate student on this campus, and he was a little baby cook, and we became a couple, and it was my intention to teach, and he could cook, and I was not going to get involved with food at all. But did you want to be the... here we are 16 years later, and we're partners in work and in life. So we are working most these days on a nonprofit called Zero Food Print that we'll tell you about. I wanted to just say a few words about how we got to this point. So we started a kind of hobby pop-up restaurant that we were doing once a week. It got more popular. We were doing it twice a week. We got in over our heads, and we invited other cooks to help us, and we changed the menu all the time. And I think that really set the stage in a lot of ways for the work that we do now, because it is all about taking on these kind of these next steps that Will was talking about, and also connecting with others. And so we ended up getting to know a lot of cooks in the Bay Area, and when we later started to understand more of the relationship between food and climate change, I think our first impulse was to see what kinds of individual choices we could make in our own restaurant businesses to do better, to source better, and to talk to people about food and climate. And we learned at some point that there was a limit to how much one person or one business or even one town could do, that it really is about building connections. So I will turn it to you.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming, and thanks for having us. It's a huge honor, and also just to build upon such great work that everybody is doing in sustainable food and agriculture and in regards to healthy soil. So Karen, a long time ago, when we were doing this pop-up and started thinking about asking other chefs to come do half the menu, said to me at the time, "You are a radical thinker." And so I'm going to just take that and run with it today. So I'm hoping that you guys are ready to have radical thinking going on here today. So I'm going to zoom out super quick, and let's do the view from, not even just 35,000 feet. We're going to go to space, and we're going to go to the future even. So it's 2,500. Alien anthropologists come and they visit Earth. So they're looking around. Oh, this planet is a lot like ours. Every molecule in nature here goes back into nature. Every molecule of organic matter, I should say, goes back into nature here. Great. Digging around, they look around. Oh, except for the entire food production system of the dominant species, the humans. They took all the organic matter, they locked it in plastic bags, locked it out of nature, then they went extinct. That's the track we're on. Look at the corporate law. They looked at this. Oh, let's look at this. In this planet, 0% of every transaction went back into the environment. On our planet, it's 1.0%. Here is 0.0. In fact, if you dig closer and a corporation tries to take money from the shareholders and send that profit back to good causes like the environment that don't aid profit, they get sued. Let's not do that on our planet. You dig further. Oh, what happened here? In 2016, they elected this weird orange guy to run the whole thing, and then everybody just was hoping he was going to solve all the problems. It didn't happen. Then they went extinct. So let's not do that. Let's just, if we're on a train and it's heading off the cliff and everybody's sitting here playing Monopoly on the train and stuff, you hear the word Gamechanger sometimes. We got to change the game. It doesn't matter who wins the Monopoly game right now. So as long as we're saying weird stuff, I just want to start with this slide and say there's new science around soil and soil carbon, and it's actually coming in large part from Berkeley. There's new science coming from Berkeley. But in order to drive home how big it is, I want to not even talk about food for a second and frame it in fossil fuels. So let's say there was a scientist at Exxon and they came up with a new, amazing fuel additive. You put a couple drops in the tank and it makes the fuel not even have any pollution, no more emissions from the fuel, right? That would be absolutely enormous. Next year they go back to the lab, they're working on it. We figured out a way to burn the carbon in the atmosphere to power the car and take it out of the atmosphere, right? Driving around, we just live our lives, it solves the problem. That would be amazing. And it turns out actually it's not even expensive. We just, we took a couple drops of Red Bull, just put it in the car. It only costs 3 cents per gallon, I mean, we would be racing to scale that up. We wouldn't not notice that. Everybody would notice that. That is what the actual science is with soil carbon. We can spend 5 cents more per burger, $1 at a $100 restaurant, whatever the case might be. We can be taking this money, investing it in carbon farming, solving the entire climate crisis, creating better food, fixing the whole broken food system, all of it, and we just have to get started as individuals.
So the Healthy Soil program that Secretary Ross mentioned helps implement certain kinds of practices. There are, I think, 35 of them. Compost application on the soil that reactivates the living systems in the soil, and many others. And we currently sort of expect someone else to take care of these things. And so California is investing in that. That's not normal. That's not what most states are doing. And there's an enormous potential for more investing in healthy soil. So that's part of what we are so excited about. I also wanted to say, you know, when we started to think about our food and climate, I think we initially had this kind of sense of overwhelm, you know, about all the things that were going wrong with climate change. And what was most exciting, I think, was that there is this thing that we can do to draw carbon from the atmosphere where it does harm and put it into the soil where it does good, where it not only, you know, works against climate change, but also improves the water holding and other conditions on the ground and the food that is grown and our resilience to climate change.
And so we have all these opportunities, but I think there's a lot of, there's something going on now called fake news. I never even heard that term a long time ago. I just kind of assumed that like the truth just rose to the top all the time, that we all just started doing that. You know, policy supports the truth. Now I kind of see like, oh, actually, I don't know if we can like trust everything. We sort of need to like create the truth and like fight for what is like the real science and the real story here. And so I wanted to just bring up this case study of beef because I think it helps clarify how different views can come together towards solutions, but we have to be open-minded. And so at a restaurant we were running called The Perennial, we were trying to showcase examples of like hyperclimate beneficial ingredients. You know, thinking like, okay, we'll show people, here's the Tesla of food. People will line up like they do for the Tesla, pay a lot of money like they do for the Tesla, and farmers will get all this money, problem will be solved. It was very hard to convince a consumer to spend that kind of money for food to begin with, you know, like, and then if we could get an extra dollar for the food or for the ingredient, you know, you'd give it to a rancher or farmer that's producing regenerative ingredients, doing incredible work and stewarding the land, and then they would have, you know, given how restaurant economics are, 27 cents or something like that. And if we didn't give them that 27 cents, someone else was going to give them 20 cents. And so they would have this 7-cent premium. And, you know, what even happens then? I don't even know that, you know, maybe 10 years later, they take over more land and conduct more good stewardship. Maybe their neighbor sees them prospering and 10 years later decides to change their practices. It's very conditional. What we need is a system where the consumer can vote with their dollar and it is unconditionally making change. And not just at the Perennial or like a Japanese or a high-priced restaurant for gourmets or something. We need it across the whole food economy. And so using beef as one example, we are trying to kind of showcase the demand side, get people excited about this great product. But if you imagine like a rancher in the Cargill feedlot beef system, the first thing that we have to understand is that beef is comprised of the feedlot, which may have deplorable conditions, and it's resource intensive, and there's a lot of antibiotics, and we don't like that. And then there's this incredible ecosystem that the cow is on. In the US, it's 760 million acres. So that's a lot of land. That's a tremendous opportunity to take carbon out of the atmosphere. That grassland ecosystem differs completely from what I understood. I never knew this before, but you know, it needs the cattle to successfully go from year to year and kind of hum along in the best and productive way for an ecosystem. Like with a tree, you know, the leaves fall off, the next year the leaves grow again. With the grassland, you need the cow there nibbling, you need the bison or the elk or whatever it is nibbling the grass, pooping, peeing, stomping. And so it's like fundamentally a misunderstanding to just think that we could stop eating beef and everything would be okay. Furthermore, like that land is not even suitable for growing crops in many cases. So then there's that. There used to be more pounds of bison in the US than there are cattle today, despite our appetite for burgers and cheeseburgers and things. And then almost just from common sense, like, you know, if you really think about it, and people eat a bunch of Impossible burgers, or we all start eating less feedlot beef, Cargill produces 7 billion pounds of beef each year. Global beef production is on the rise despite production and consumption, despite all the messaging around like eat less beef, all these things. If I don't eat the cheeseburger here, I mean, I'm eating less beef, but if I don't eat the cheeseburger here, then it's basically like I'm absolving myself of some personal responsibility. I'm opting out of that system, but it's not actually changing that system. Cargill's just gonna ship it to India, you know, or China or something like that. So why don't we just change the beef production system? There's this massive amount of land where there used to be ruminants grazing around, and you know, they would all be in one place, pooping and peeing and depositing manure and organic matter and nibbling, and then a coyote would come and they would run away, and by the next year when they came back, the land was completely restored and humming along and taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and the soil was holding many tons of carbon. And now, you know, we have real estate and fences and the cows instead of bison, but we can just manage the way the cattle graze. And we can just add compost to jumpstart that process and make the results like 10 times higher than just managed grazing.
I think the idea that we're talking about is we have started, I think, to consider the effects of our personal consumer choices in terms of food. Like, how do my choices affect the world that I live in and the future generations? But if those choices that we make don't actually change the food system or create positive change in terms of land use, then our actual effect is limited. And so what Anthony was talking about with the restaurant sourcing choices and how we wanted to support the good farmers, we started to feel that the pace of climate change was too fast to count on the existing structures of rewarding the best stewards of the land and hoping that others would follow suit. We needed to make direct investments in regenerative agriculture. So just to step back for a second, what does regenerative agriculture mean? It is all of the practices that are focused on healthy soil, on climate smart agriculture, and getting our soil to be full of carbon, which is, you know, the basis of life, and full of all of the microorganisms that support human health and nutrients, and are also better able to withstand things like drought and flood. So thinking about how do you actually get people to adopt regenerative agriculture on farmland, it's really hard to think of farmers making those choices that might cost an initial investment if they don't know that there will be people there ready to support them by buying their products. So we were initially thinking about building up demand, but what we realized was that you know, it's absolutely true that the restaurant industry and the farm industry or farm lifestyle have a lot in common, where there are really tight margins, we have real problems with cash flow, it's really hard to invest for the long term in these industries. And so we were thinking, what is the barrier for farmers and ranchers to adopt these practices? Because we were seeing people interested in buying food grown in healthy soil, but not enough food grown in healthy soil. And so the Healthy Soils program that California started is one mechanism for supporting that with grants. And we started to think, how can we activate consumers who want this to actually make grants to farmers? So I think we should sort of get more into the nitty-gritty and past some of the abstract.
Sure. So basically, we were inspired by definitely the Healthy Soils program. And in part, this program is just a way to bring more money into that economic framework. And so another inspiration is the fast transition that's going on with renewable energy. And so you can see the actual term is community choice aggregation, but we maybe know that more as just kind of the program where like a utilities company charges everybody $5 more per month on the bill. And then anybody can opt out, just return the self-addressed stamped envelope. Not a big deal here. 10 years later, the whole city has renewable energy. So imagine if that change was completely contingent on us taking out a loan, going on the roof, putting up the solar panels, calling up the utilities company, figuring out how to connect it. Nothing would ever change. Just creating that framework that is almost like effortless and just an opt-out makes it happen in 10 years. Well, whatever. But so, I mean, that's what we're trying to create here in a way in the food system, whether it's at restaurants or other, food service, anything, but a system where people can basically effortlessly send a few cents per meal towards improving the grid of food.
So how does that work in a restaurant? So we have organized restaurants who have been early adopters, and we have about 50 Zero Food Print members, including Chez Panisse. We're very excited about Chez Panisse just joined. We actually haven't announced that yet, but yes, it's been announced. We're really delighted to have about 50 restaurants now, and we're on a growth trajectory. But the first way that we engaged restaurants was through a life cycle assessment, which is like looking at all the emissions related to the restaurant and helping restaurants become carbon neutral. That is pretty labor intensive and requires the restaurants to make that investment in carbon neutrality and hope that the consumers reward them. And so this year, we actually rolled out a new way for restaurants to get involved, which involves much more of the public, where it's very simple and it's much more like that community choice aggregation model, where participating restaurants add 1% to the bill. So if you go out and it costs $43, it will be $43.43. And that restaurant gathers up each of those small individual contributions from diners and puts it into the Restore California Fund that we're managing that makes grants to farmers to do things like compost application and get their soil to be healthier, to be part of a climate solution. So we have, the whole nonprofit is just an excuse to work with illustrators. I hope that was obvious. We just recently worked with an illustrator to show how the cents, 1 cent from every dollar can flow from the restaurant part of our food system into the farm part of our food system and actually pull down the carbon from CO2 and build soil carbon. So we're really trying to, as Anthony said, make it really as effortless as possible. So, when you go out to eat, there's just this little additional few cents, but they actually together in tandem can make this huge difference in terms of drawing carbon down and restoring our soil, restoring our agricultural land, and also connecting consumers with farmers. So that is something that I feel really privileged to be a part of as a member of the restaurant industry. Restaurants are, as Chez Panisse, I think, really pioneered. Restaurants are kind of conduits for consumers and farmers to connect, right? Like in our urban lives especially, it can be very mysterious where food comes from. And restaurants, I think especially following Chez Panisse, are telling the story of where the food comes from, letting people really connect with that origin. And I think that Zero Food Print is also talking about what are the challenges for farmers and what are the opportunities that farmers have with support from eaters. And we're all eaters. So we're really kind of activating our whole restaurant community to connect all the parts of the food system. And so I understand that we're currently in the middle of a time where, with coronavirus, where people maybe don't want to connect, but I think it is so important that we don't isolate ourselves in our own little perspective. To overcome something like climate change, we really need to engage all parts of our economic system. More specifically, we're thinking about the food system, but I think it's true in other sectors of the economy as well, to think about how do we just actually recognize that we're in a crisis? So like as Anthony said, we're all sort of like going along and like trying not to break the rules and follow the way we've been told to do things. And so like sometimes we'll hear from people that it might be hard for consumers to think about climate change like at a restaurant. Well, we're gonna be thinking about climate change a lot. That is the fact. And if we can think about it in ways that are solution-driven, that are action-oriented, then I think that's really positive. So that's sort of how we have managed, or how we have imagined our program. I think it's growing. And so I hope that if you, as consumers, want to go to restaurants and say, like, why are you not engaged in this? Like, we would love it. Then that is powerful. You can also talk to your farmers, go to the farmers market and talk about healthy soil and ask them what they're doing, what would be helpful, and just actually kind of engage in the solution at all levels.
Yeah, I mean, almost in closing, it's like hard to even imagine that it's so simple that like kind of like saving the world or whatever just comes down to like saving a few acres of the world at a time.
So I think that maybe in conclusion, we are here in the University of California, which, as Anthony mentioned, has done a lot of research on the science of soil and steps that we can take to improve the soil. And we are in a state that is really taking steps to connect climate policy and agricultural policy, which is so amazing. And we are here, in this edible education course that Alice Waters designed. And I think that the work that she has done with Chez Panisse has really informed all of this. And so it's such an exciting place to imagine change. And so we've been thinking about the restaurant industry, but you could think about it in terms of consumer products, like retail food, or any sort of, there are also fabric. Anyway, I'm just saying this is just the beginning. I hope that you are continuing the story. Thanks.
Karen, do you want to come up? So here's a suggestion from the students is stand up for 30 seconds. Here's your chance. This is like the 7th inning stretch. You get to stand up, take a deep breath, stretch. You can tell me if you like this. We can keep it in.
Yeah, the stand up part, right? Yeah.
Come sit down with me over here, have a glass of water. Okay, you can sit down now.
Oh my God, look at this.
These are blood oranges
Yeah.
this week. Whoop. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all for coming. So tonight, also, I would love it if we could have some questions. And I want to invite people who have not asked a question yet this semester to come up first. So come to one of these mics. And also, when you ask your question, try to do it in a very concise way so we can get as many questions. Because one of the things you asked for in the mid-course feedback was to have a little more time for questions. So I'm going to come to you in just a second. But I wanted to thank you, Karen on the far right, for using the word imagination. Because when I think about you and Anthony, and you're both very humble. We have this core value here at Berkeley about confidence without attitude. I think you both exude that. But this permission to imagine is just so important right now. And so I think one of the things I'd love for the three of you to talk about tonight is, how do, two people who are thinking like radical thoughts off in the restaurant world connect with the Secretary of Agriculture and Food in California and actually imagine and implement a program and a partnership? How does that come about? Like, how does that go from imagination into action? So that's one question I have. I always get the prerogative of asking my own questions first. The other question I have is one that comes up, and maybe students want to build on this too, but it's fabulous to have Alice here in the room with us tonight, who is really the champion of connecting the farm to the table, to the fork, to the eater, and now you're connecting the restaurant directly to the climate and the agricultural system. So I love seeing that span. And one of the challenges that we get here at Edible Ed every week is, how do we do this in a way that is, massively inclusive, massively affordable, non-elitist, all of those things. So I think we need to talk about that as well. So we'll come back to that. But I'm going to invite you to come up, introduce yourself. You can just build the answers into these questions. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah.
Tell us what you're studying and take it away.
Hi, thank you all for coming and talking. My name's Cassidy. I'm a political science major. Before that, I worked for about 10 years in the food industry, both front and back of the house. And I was just wondering if you could, especially Anthony, talk a little bit about your transition from food service, being a chef, to policy. I hope to affect policy change one day too. So.
Sure. I'm still at Mission Chinese Food a couple days a week, so I'm not out yet. But, basically it just happened pretty organically as this opportunity started to arise. I think we just felt like the opportunity was so great to make a difference through nonprofit work. And then that to start answering Will's question of how does that even actually happen? It actually happened at Mission Chinese Food. We were talking to people from the California Air Resources Board. They were there having dinner and kind of leaned in on the table and pitched for way too long probably and talked about all this stuff. And they basically said I think there's legs here. We should talk about this further. And that began the conversation. And then Department of Food and Agriculture got involved. So I think, first of all, thank God we're in California. But then,
that's number one.
I think that as we try to move forward as a society and overcome some of the challenges, that there just needs to be more public-private collaborations like this. So I'm so pleased.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of them, at our last science panel where they heard about this, we know that there is literally a hunger for more public-private partnerships in clothing as well as in food. And so out of respect for standing up something that many different kinds of partners could bring from their corporate perspective or their business perspective, we're going to be doing workshops to make sure as we stand up more formally public-private partnerships, we've got something that's scalable and that will work for all different kinds of businesses within the food system, but also, as you started to talk about, in the fiber shed itself. The other thing I want to say is this is the power of never let it be diminished with striking a conversation with somebody you really don't know, but the power of food to bring us together, and then you can have these kinds of conversations and really be as imaginative and creative as you can be. So, and also think about how that one conversation will touch people that you may never see again, but it's powerful. So we should never diminish this ability as humans to make a connection around something that becomes its own movement. So good on ya.
I absolutely agree. There's a kind of ancient tradition of connecting with people over food. And the restaurant, as a kind of cultural artifact, is relatively new. It's just a few hundred years old. But I think it is a really important public space. So in this country, in this moment, we're spending less and less time with strangers. And restaurants continue to be a place where we get out and mingle. And you kind of can intersect with people who are different from you through experiencing another culture's food, or even just talking to people at the next table. And so I think that when we first got into the restaurant industry, we were doing weird stuff. And we had a food truck as our very first business, and I saw people connecting in line and making friends. And we also ended up, not on purpose, but we ended up seating strangers together. And I saw people fall in love. I mean, I am a little bit of a romantic about restaurants because they do perform this really important service of giving people a reason to get out and be together in pleasure and kind of let down their guard. And so I think it's no accident that this public-private partnership was first forged in a restaurant with a mouthy waiter.
That's very meaningful.
Well, I want to underscore that because, here you are. I mean, this is a sign of being sort of entrepreneurial. Well, a couple things. One is Anthony's just told us he's working on zero food print. And he's still cooking. That's very entrepreneurial. Very rarely does somebody go from zero to launch something. Generally, we have to do more than one thing at a time. I certainly, when I launched Republic of Tea, I had to go take another job. I had a little kid also, and so that's very common. So I just want to, let everybody know here that that's kind of how it gets done. Somebody doesn't just write you a big check and finance your dream. You have to do it. And the other thing is I just love the notion of doing the work and then starting the bigger conversation and then acting on it and following through. I'm sure it's not easy. There's probably lots of times people don't return your email or answer your call, but what do? You keep going, right? Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we do have a kind of entrepreneurial attitude toward our nonprofit work, and part of that is not being too proud to do anything. And so when this project was really getting off the ground, we had Mission Chinese food, and we had another restaurant called The Perennial, which was trying to walk the walk by sourcing the regenerative ingredients. And there would be days where I would sort of look back at my day and think I had, done web design, emergency plumbing. I was the morning baker, and then I would be writing a million emails and was sort of doing this nonprofit stuff. That's upside down, dude.
That's okay.
That's okay. They can get it.
So the thing that we were really thinking about a lot was this ingredient called kernza, which is the long root system.
We just heard about that in detail just a week or two ago from Carla Vernon at General Mills, who told us her kernza story too.
Yeah, so I think we had been thinking, that kind of ingredient would really focus people's minds on the potential of everything that's happening underground. Then we started to realize that it couldn't just be one magical ingredient or even 5 magical ingredients. It had to be the way that we grow our existing staples shift, and how do we shift the land use. And so we closed the restaurant, and now Zero Food Print is my only job. I'm down to one job. It's really crazy.
What were you studying when you were here?
I have a PhD in English.
Did you hear that?
That's what my bachelor's is in.
Yeah, so I taught R1A.
Yeah.
There you have it.
So even English professors can be entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that what we're doing with food is ultimately communicative. It is about finding the meaning in these cultural systems. And for me, it also felt like I couldn't fully care about 19th century literature in light of climate change. That just became so overwhelming. So I think climate change has really changed my life. And this guy has too.
Thank you. How about another question here?
Hello, my name is Fisher Heimberger, and I study conservation and resource studies, but I've done my fair share of development studies as well. And I had a question for all of you, specifically regarding that interaction between the public and the private sectors. And specifically kind of from that background of development studies, sometimes there's this history of the private sector getting really excited by just pooling a bunch of money and then hoping that it's going to solve all the issues. And then same time with the public sector, there's a lot of issues of distribution and things like that. So I was curious, considering the incredible graphic and illustration that showed the process of raising the money from the restaurants, then that going there seemed to be a big leap from the pool of money versus just solving the problems in the soil. I'm curious from maybe both of your perspectives, what is the process of distribution of those funds? How do you choose which farms get that financing, which ones don't? Does that have effects? Are there giant farms that maybe are big corporate farms that get priority, or some of the smaller farms or things like that?
If I could start with our program, because it has a strong connection to this, but they have the freedom to fund the way they want to. So first of all, we're very mindful that we're stewards of these public resources that we're getting. They're being generated to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help us meet our carbon goals. So we have criteria that anyone can apply for, but a minimum of 35% of our total funds are targeted for disadvantaged communities, socially previously underrepresented farmers, small farms for all of our grants, to make sure that as we transition to this economy, that we're not leaving people behind, that some of the most impacted communities from the kind of economy we have today have suffered from some of being the center of carrying the burden of too much of one thing in their community. So that's for us as a minimum, is that 35% are going to go to those kinds of funds. We have a whole verification process, which the unfortunate part for us is when you're taking public dollars, accountability, transparency, paperwork of progress reports, we want to verify. So we ask people to keep their records for 3 years, because what we know from just doing good old extension work, 3 years should turn it into a habit that lasts forever, and they should start to see enough of the benefits of doing that. So we have verification to make sure that what the people of the state are funding is accomplishing what we said we were going to be doing with it. And I think that's going to be where the real magic of public-private partnerships in this space happens, is that they will set up the criteria for who can apply for their grant program, and they could use us or some other mechanism. We would like to see one verification process instead of dueling verification processes, and that's where we're hope to make the magic happen, that the state of California said, you're doing the kinds of practices, they're measurable, they can be quantified, and they're getting the results. So that's how we do it from a state perspective. And actually, most large-scale farmers aren't applying for these grants, but they are watching to see what works. It's our small and mid-sized farmers that really need this kind of assistance because of all the issues and challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to really dig into the details of how the grant making works. And I should say that we are in early stages. So at this moment, we are doing pilot programs that are more handpicked, and we have applications, we're accepting applications which will close June 30th. And so we have a system that we have been developing to rank the applications. And the primary way of ordering them is how much carbon can be sequestered, how much modeled carbon sequestration per dollar. So really like the carbon return on the investment. We use a tool called Comet Planner that the state has worked with the originators of that tool at Colorado State University. And it allows farmers to, to say, if we do this practice, how much carbon could we expect to sequester? And that tool is getting more accurate all the time. And this science is really evolving. And so I think that some of like the decimal places are not fully worked out, but we know that the direction is towards sequestration. And so we have put relatively, we have emphasized the carbon. And then after that ranking, we have kind of systems in place to ensure diversity in different kinds of ways, like product diversity and geographical and identity, and then also to encourage relationships between zero food print member restaurants and Restore grantees, so that if a restaurant is working with someone in their supply chain who wants to do a project like this, they get a boost. So we are trying to balance all of these different values, but for us, the number one value is carbon sequestration.
And we're working with a lot of the same technical service providers as CDFA, like the California Resource Conservation Districts, et cetera. And so we're not the boots on the ground. We're sort of like kind of more doing the marketing and bringing the money in. And I mean, even the Healthy Soils program is brand new, basically.
So
It,
we're
just
just starting our third year.
Yeah.
And the technical assistance is a critical element of making this work, to make sure that the knowledge we have on these college campuses is actually getting to the hands of the end users. And especially small and mid-sized farmers need that type of support. They're not large enough, and they certainly don't have the margins to hire a bunch of specialists for themselves. So we fund resource conservation districts, we fund cooperative extension, and we have a new model that we've been funding for the last 2 years that's part of cooperative extension, but they're called Community Climate Smart Agriculture Educators. Most of them are master's students. A lot of them have worked overseas in development, and they just love working directly with the farmers on the land. So they're out there all the time talking about what is climate smart agriculture, here's the kinds of practices, helping them apply for some of our grants as well as the United States Department of Agriculture at the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That technical assistance, that investment is what will be transformative for all of us. It's really helping a whole bunch of people learn about this, go to a neighbor's farm for a demonstration day and say, oh, I could be doing that on my farm as well.
There's also evidence that implementing these climate smart agricultural practices are not only good for the environment, but actually can really improve the bottom line for small farmers. So it's sort of a win-win, win-win.
Yeah.
We actually
So-
had Lauren, Lauren
Yes. Oh,
was
from
here
Semple-
earlier
yes,
in
from
the
Semple
semester,
Creek, yeah.
and Dr. Silver was here
Yes.
too. So we've really been focusing
Yeah.
on regenerative agriculture as our theme
Yeah,
this
yeah.
semester.
So I just want to put in a plug for anybody who cares about economics. It seems like we need more people in ag economics. Being able to quantify, because over time there's upfront costs potentially, but over time that like saving on input costs is another way of having a more healthy bottom line. So we really also need to do economic analysis to help people who might be skeptical about this is just going to cost me, to being able to show them, these are the numbers, they speak for themselves.
Right.
I'm very excited about this, you can tell.
I love we have the Secretary of Food and Agriculture with two, early stage entrepreneurs, together talking about this at Berkeley. A lot of times the students come to me and say, aren't we just in a bubble here? But the fact of the matter is California really sets the pace
We're the
for the
living
world.
lab
For the
for
world.
a lot of this.
Yeah, in many ways. And what I hear in the zero food print strategy a little bit is this: a lot of early stage enterprises, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, they like to envision sort of who's my reference customer, right? So you just announced that Chez Panisse, that's certainly a reference customer. A reference customer is anybody that you would recognize. That's a name I recognize as a as a leader or as a credible customer or community member tier. But what would be the game-changing reference customer? I was just looking at my notes. McDonald's has 30,000 restaurants. If you took 1% of their $20 billion revenues, that would add up. Do you think about that? And do you think about how you get to a point where you really get traction on that?
Yeah, I mean, by far, I was on a call with the head of sustainability at Chipotle yesterday.
Yep.
Like, we're just pitching anybody. To me, a major stepping stone would be, let's say, if dining programs at universities like Berkeley, if the University of California did it, that could influence thousands of universities, billions of meals. And so, it's the same thing with persistence. We have tried to make those things happen, but maybe the people in this actual room could get Berkeley on board, which would then get UC Davis, which would then get UCLA, and on and on.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I've been reading this history of the United States, and it is sort of blowing my mind, that women have only had the right to vote for 101 years, and 100 years ago, or 102 years ago, people would have been like, oh, it's never gonna happen. It's just never happened in the whole history of the world. And then it happened, and now it's inevitable, of course, And so when Anthony kind of created that, theoretical 2500, what would an alien say about our planet, you could also imagine a different history where it's in the 21st, what are we in? 21st century. In the 21st century, university students rose up and said, do not feed us this food that is a part of the problem anymore. We will not stand for it. And then the big food service providers had to respond and start making investments in climate smart agriculture. And then that's a totally different story. And so I really recommend this book. It's called These Truths. But I think what you see is that there are, single conversations that can change the whole course of American history. And ultimately, that is world history. And I think that you don't know what the conversation is until much later. And you have to have many conversations in the hope that one of them is going to have a really big impact. But I think that there is such a potential for students in universities, but also secondary education, to say, this has a huge impact on the climate, and we demand something better. So get after it.
And when we pitch those companies, the answer is always oh, that's very interesting. We'll consider that, and if the client asks for it, then we'll be happy to do that.
Mm-hmm. So there's two things really important here. One is a question that you asked about this being available to all people. And I work for a governor who California for All is that's not just a motto for us. And I'm acutely aware and have been from a very young age that not everyone gets to eat 3 really good healthy meals a day, that we still have a significant problem with hunger on a global basis and food insecurity, even in our own backyard. So if you have a McDonald's or a Chipotle that does this at different price points, it means that we have done this in a way that makes it economically work for all size people, and making it available. It shouldn't just be available to certain price points. That's very important. But I also have to say, last year, 2 really meaningful IPCC reports came out just within 6 weeks of each other. One was about the decline of biodiversity and what that means for the future of humanity. And 6 weeks later was an IPCC report on food security, land management, and farming practices. And the momentum that has been created on a global basis in a relatively short period of time for nature-based solutions, natural working lands, that how we steward the earth will not only address climate change, we can heal the earth, which is what regenerative agriculture is all about. So we have so many unbelievable opportunities at this moment in time as we build up for the COP in Glasgow in November this year. It will be preceded, we hope, with the biodiversity gathering, the Congress of the World on Biodiversity in China in October. This is very, very important. Nature-based solutions are real. Technology is making it happen faster. Sorry, I had to put that pitch in.
No, I love that, and I just love the idea of kind of Anthony audaciously pitching these people on this idea, and then being able to say, oh, by the way, when you're ready, I'll ask Secretary Ross to come to the meeting to tell you how serious California is about this.
I know, if I could just conference you in on those calls, then
I
that would
mean,
solve it right
that's
away.
pretty powerful. You have a question.
Hi, my name is Aria. I am a geography and global poverty and practice student. And thinking more on like the human side of it, I was wondering how your restaurants, like past and future, are looking at making tipped wages more equitable, because there's a lot of work with the, against the other NRA, the National Restaurants Association, against having tipped workers not be paid, what they're paid, which is like $2 an hour, and getting them up to the minimum wage. And I know that that is not really on topic with all of the amazing, climate change research that you're doing, but I think that it is still really important, especially given the fact that a lot of people aren't able to, eat with their dollar that in a way that we're able to in the Bay Area.
So here in California, tipped workers earn a minimum wage.
San Francisco.
In California.
Okay.
And it varies by location within the U.S., but in a lot of places in this country, tipped workers are paid very little, and then that not only affects them economically, but also makes them very vulnerable to things like sexual harassment from customers. And so I definitely think that that is an important change that we need to make in the restaurant industry. We have not focused on that because our work is really about letting the restaurant world know the potential for food-related climate solutions. And so when we're asking people to get involved, we have to be very specific about what we're asking for. And we have been really trying hard not to get into like a purity test where all of our members have to follow policies that are outside of the scope of the work that we do. So like we do have members in New York, which has that tipping law that I think is really unjust, and I have not gotten involved with that because I will say that I have a lot of things that I would like to change about the world, and when I try to do all of them at once, I'm not very effective. And so I have decided that climate change is my number one, and issues of access, equity, and fairness are my number two. And so if it comes up, I will talk about it, but I don't bring it in. So that's sort of the choice that I have made. Do you want to say?
No, I think that's good.
Thank you. How about up here?
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I guess I'm actually a community member. I just finished graduate school in environmental science at UC Santa Barbara and moved back to Berkeley, where I grew up. But I'm curious if anyone can talk about what it takes to maintain a public-private partnership, kind of the nitty-gritty of that, because it can be very kind of personality-focused, having a champion at an agency or someone who's really committed to their nonprofit work, but how do you make this thing work for the next 5, 10, 20 years?
So I can give you a short answer on what my whole being as secretary are the things that I'm most passionate about that are new to the department. I've been working very hard to make sure they're so embedded that a change in administration can't easily dismantle it. Now, I've watched a lot of good things that I worked on as chief of staff at USDA be dramatically changed in this 4-year period of time. So I'm not going to be kidding myself, but the work itself has such a following and such deep stakeholder engagement and enthusiasm, it would be hard to stop it from our perspective. And that's my whole goal as a public official, is that it's not just about the people who are the political appointees and work on it and then a new batch come in. It's about putting it into programs and working across all agencies so that it's connected in a way that we're all achieving the major goals that have been set for us, and they go beyond a person who happens to hold my seat or my deputy, that it's really embedded in programs, and this is how we do business. That's from my perspective.
I think Secretary Ross probably has more experience on this than we do. We're just getting to figure it out. But I think having a kind of collaborative spirit in general is crucial.
Thank you. How about here? We welcome more questions too. We'll have a few more minutes.
Hi, my name is Joy Lin, and I'm a freshman studying nutritional science here. My question is kind of being touched on all of our discussion. Because recently, I don't know if you guys have heard about a protest started by UCSC grad student workers because they think their payment, like the salary they got, was too low to sustain life in Bay Area. And also, it's highly affecting our campus because they were gathering in our dining commons and like giving out free lunches because they said, if you don't pay us enough, we'll get the food we deserve by ourselves. And tomorrow it is being said that half of our classes will be shut down because they are going to have a strike. So what do you guys have any thoughts on this events or issues, especially in a campus that like where UC Berkeley is so socially active, and also how do we relate this to maybe civil eats? Because after the adoption of maybe regenerative or climate saving techniques of farming may increase the price of food.
I think I read somewhere a long time ago that the average American spends like 6.5% of their income on food, and it's the lowest in the developing world. Developed world, I'm sorry. So yes. So I mean, I think we just need to pay more for food.
Yeah, we celebrate cheap food, and the system's built on that because access traditionally has been the biggest concern, that people weren't healthy enough. That's how the school lunch program was created, is that, quite frankly, people were not healthy, they weren't strong, they couldn't achieve their potential. And if you're hungry, it's hard for students to study and everything else. So we have a long history of building our farm programs around the availability of, and meaning low cost, so everybody would have access to it. And that's just one of the challenges of the system. And I think that's why there's such a strong interest in food today, because we've reconnected with what does that really mean? And we do want our food choices to align with our personal values. And so that's changed it a lot.
Yeah, I think one way to think about it is that the food that is very, very cheap in its price tag is ultimately very expensive for us as a society. So when we have really cheap meat, for example, that is grown in a way that kind of creates a crisis of antibiotic overuse, then we are ultimately paying for that in our healthcare, in our environmental degradation, and in so many other ways. And so I think what we have really been thinking about is not valorizing like the one perfect piece of food that was grown in every perfect way, but thinking about how do we change our incentives that, we're all paying taxes that go into an agricultural system that's really supporting what has come to be called conventional agriculture with price supports, and the way that the insurance system is set up is not actually responding to the real risk from climate change. And so we're paying to support agriculture that is, we're paying for it through our taxes, and then we're paying for it again through our taxes to clean up. And so if we shifted to paying for food to be grown in a way that was more climate conscious, then it would be better for small farmers. It would cost, the price tag would be higher, but the cost in the overall would be less.
I really appreciate the complexity of your question, and it really demonstrates, I think, how everything is connected. And last week, this year, for the first time, we have a graduate seminar for Edible Ed, where a number of the graduate students who are in our new Transforming Food Systems certificate program get together on Thursday morning, and we discuss the issues in more depth, and the graduate students get to lead the class. And it's last week, one of the students, Lucy, brought up, who's studying, getting her master's in public health, was talking about how we set sort of a reference state in our mind of what we expect things to cost. And what we don't necessarily always understand or recognize is how much sort of energy and influence and has gone into focusing us on what something should be valued. So I love your comment, Karen, about, we're not pricing in the externalities, but then we get this reference price for, a salad should be $6. And then I remember Lucy's example was, I go to Sweet Green and it's 14, and it's like, it's just like, I can't deal with that gap. But then what she said was, once she started exploring what they're doing in terms of, I'm buying an organic product, that organic product is going back to the farm. These farmers are practicing these principles, et cetera. Or building in, fair wage for all the people that work. So, what you're really calling us to do, all of you here, it's this massive, in order to address this climate change issue, we have to revalue everything.
Yeah, I think for me, a really good example of that is milk. So when Anthony and I became parents, we had to really think about our food choices in terms of our child, who is just like a milk. She's made of milk, and what milk were we going to buy? And it was like, whoa, the organic milk is so expensive, and we have settled on Strauss milk, which I think is maybe like the second most expensive one in the options at our grocery store. And it comes in a glass bottle, and the glass bottle has a deposit, and so we have to then bring it back. But they are really making investments in changing land use and regenerative agriculture, but also really innovating bioenergy. So using the manure from the dairies to power the vehicles on the dairy land, and it explains on the bottle all about how their work is factoring into the whole system. And now I feel like I give my daughter this milk, and I feel like it's such a holy thing, and then her friends come over and will drink half a cup of milk and leave it, and she's 7, and she'll be like, don't waste that, the cow made that, the cow made that for their baby, but we get it, you know? And like she has like this whole worldview, which is, I swear, not something that I said. But I mean, she's really valuing that milk, and I think appropriately, right? Like, that is expensive milk, and she is drinking every last drop of it and like really like caring about it. And I think that we have a kind of like throwaway attitude about food when it's cheap. And we shouldn't be throwing it away. We should be valuing it appropriately.
Whole discussion on food waste.
Yeah.
But I need to say
done that, yeah.
super quickly, Strauss, amazing leaders in sustainability, but it is a perfect example of this kind of improving the grid of food because Strauss is comprised of 9 family dairies. So Albert Strauss's dairy is one of the carbon farming pilots from several years ago. They've had compost applied, managed grazing, or whatever. There's 8 more dairies on Strauss that are waiting to be part of that work. So some of the money from that we've been collecting at Mission Chinese is going to one of the dairies that are part of Strauss called Tresh Family Farm. And you know, we also serve their meat at Mission Chinese after the dairy cows are slaughtered. But even Strauss, 8/9 of Strauss is just waiting to be activated for carbon farming to take more carbon out of the atmosphere. So it's not even just about making a sustainable choice. We need to fund the change. We need to make the change at the best dairy or the not the best dairy. Like it's all land waiting to have this change made.
And the early adopters really will lead it, but you have to have enough early adopters for others to see that it proves also the business case of this, and it becomes the mainstream practice. And I think that's what we're all about, is making sure we're helping to fund the early adopters to prove out to a massive audience what this can do.
Anthony, I'm just getting a sense that you're trying to make a reading recommendation there on your lap.
This is, if you have it, this is.
We did have Paul
this is it.
Hawken here
Did
in the
you?
class,
Okay.
I think last year or the year before, to introduce Drawdown, but it's a perennial favorite. So want to make a plug for it?
Well, so I just have this here because sometimes the question might come up, why 1%? And so to me, it's pretty exciting because on the micro level, we've done all these life cycle assessments of restaurants. 1% is almost always enough. At the macro level, and I didn't like read this, you know, I flipped through this book and looked at the examples and was inspired, especially because a lot of them are about food. And then at some point, I was talking to someone at Drawdown and kind of like talking about how to operationalize it. And they were kind of saying like, oh, well, carbon neutral is not enough. And we were going back and forth. And it was like, okay, well, what is the drawdown level? What should people do? And he was like, I don't know, we don't do that, you know, or whatever. And so then I was looking at the numbers, and if you just go like back of the napkin math to do everything in the book and achieve drawdown and take, you know, reduce or remove 1 trillion tons of carbon from the current trajectory and lower global temperatures and do all of it, it takes 1% of GDP each year. And then the carbon farming solutions are like 10 times more effective or better ROI public benefit than all solutions overall. And then that like almost overwhelming case for carbon farming doesn't even include the biogeochemistry of the recent years. That's just based on like 10, 15 years ago data. And so it's just like so off the charts beneficial that we just need to start working on it.
I think there's really not a downside, you know, to carbon farming or regenerative agriculture, however you want to think about it, that if you build healthy soil, you are making us more climate resilient and reducing our dependence on these additives and improving the lives of animals. I mean, there are like so many things, even over and above saving us from climate change.
So maybe the homework assignment should be to create the carbon farming meme to go viral.
Yes.
Oh, please do.
Yes.
And I want to add that these investments in this type of farming, when you look at the world today, the numbers of subsistence farmers, they're usually headed by women. They are some of the poorest people. They can barely grow enough food to feed their families. So if you take a look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, over half of those 20 goals connect directly to what can happen on the land working with our farmers and ranchers.
I want to thank Karen and Anthony and Secretary Ross for being here tonight. It's been really inspiring and informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next week, some lessons from the garden with 3 passionate gardeners, Beth Ratner, Kelly Carlisle, and yours truly. Somebody said, why doesn't Will give a talk? So you
So
get
you're
one
going
next
to.
week. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
it's
Thank you,
time for
Alice.
Allison to do Kahoot.